Welcome to another edition of Fragments of Rock. What happened was I suddenly discovered loads of tapes in my garage. Some I knew I had, and some were lost tapes. I just didn't realize I still had them. And what you're going to hear today is one about Rick Wakeman. Rick Wakeman in his very early days. Every week I used to read the Melody Maker, New Musical Express disc, and I remember the Melody Maker had a headline over, "Is this the new Keith Emerson?" And there was this little lad called Rick Wakeman. I think he must have been, I don't know, late teens or early 20s, I can't remember. But he caught my imagination. I loved Keith Emerson's music when he was in Nice. And now there's this new, and of course there's Emerson, Lake and Palmer to come from them, but there was this new kid on the block, and he happened to be turning up at the Boat Club with another band I knew called the Strawbs. The whole thing is ridiculous, really, because why would Rick Wakeman join the Strawberry Hill Boys? Yeah. One thing is that they had a cellist. The band had a cellist called Claire Denise. And Claire Denise decided she was going to go back to classical music. Dave Cousins, well, actually, let's Dave Cousins tell the story. It's much more interesting coming from him.
Yeah, okay, let's play the tape.
After a while, the cello began to dominate the music. We began to write songs which depended on cello, which we felt was, a bit difficult because you were limited in what you could achieve with that. And when she said she was going to go back into the classical world, we looked around to see what else we could do. And we'd known Rick for a long time, and suddenly Rick, suddenly happened to come along at the right time. He wrote me a letter to say he wasn't doing anything at the time, so he came into the group.
During in that audio, I could hear in the background, it sounded like Black Sabbath in the background. So where did this interview take place?
We're going back to October 1970, the Boat Club. The Boat Club was in its prime with live music. I mean, the amount of live music they used to have along Trentside. There was three Trentside clubs: the Union, the Boat, and the Brit.
That's a small venue for a big band. What was the acoustics like?
Well, remember they weren't that. The bands may have been big in name, but they didn't have the amazing equipment that you had. I mean, it was better than the Cliff Richard and the Shadows had with their Vox amplifiers, but it's only one up from that. I mean, someone mentioned the fact, and then they heard that Rick Wakeman was going to be on about, did he bring all his keyboards? Well, no, he didn't have all those keyboards. He had an organ. If he was lucky, occasionally had a harpsichord to play on, and a piano. But I think when he was there, he just had a straightforward organ to play on.
Yeah. Back to the interview. So we've got Rick writing a letter saying, "Can I be on the band, please?" or give me some work, please. Anyway, what happened then?
Just a collection of antiques and curios had just come out. I think that's probably why the record company wanted to plug it. And so obviously the group was keen to talk about it.
The whole group was absolutely compatible from the very minute we started to get together. There was nothing out of place.
The Antiques Week, which is 12 minutes we learnt in an afternoon.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of 4 3-minute numbers. And we said, when Tony and I were discussing how we would record the Antiques, or not record the Antiques, but learn the Antiques Week, we said, well, we'll learn the first number first and we'll practice that one, get that off. Then we'll learn the second one, then the third one, then the fourth one. And we'll fit them all together. It'll probably take us about 3 or 4 weeks, to get it off. But in fact, we just went through the whole thing, 12 minutes. It took us an afternoon to get it off, and we did it about 2 nights later, It's a really complicated thing with 3, 4 vocals here and there, sometimes 1, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, sometimes 4.
I know it sounds like we're sort of blowing our own trumpets, but I've rehearsed with orchestras, symphony orchestras, concert orchestras, large dance bands and sort of large bands with reading parts, but I've never come across 5 people who think so alike and everybody likes what somebody else does.
It's just so interesting that those recollections of how albums were produced, and actually when you listen to the whole of this interview, which we've done, in hindsight, the end of this interview, which we'll come to in a few more minutes' time, it's really quite sad, isn't it? What's said later on.
2 interviews here. We're going to hear the later one later. So let's not spoil that. Let's just stay with that moment at the Boat Club. They're about to do a live performance again, a big performance in Concert Hall in London, I think it was. That was in January. And obviously, they were so keen, I wanted to ask about the line of the whole band, because I got a bit lost.
In January, we're doing another concert at the Queen Elizabeth Hall, And this time Rick used to go to the Royal College of Music, and we're doing a concert with the Royal College of Music choir, an orchestra. You know, they've apparently got the best choir in Europe, 250-piece choir, and we're going to be using them on the concert, which will be rather nice.
Sounds wonderful.
He wants to give them, you know, something back for what they gave him, really. He feels that they're hard up for funds, apparently, at the moment, and Rick wants to, you know, he feels they sort of put him where he is now, you know, playing music, so he wants to do something in return.
Well, Rick's got a musical background. Is your background or your training, say, at university, musical?
No, I did maths and statistics and physics. Horrible thing. God knows how I got into this.
And what about Rick?
Well, it's a weird musical background. It's a mixture of classical, jazz, rock, pop. I had
Strawbs.
And Strawbs, yeah. I had a classical training right through up until college. I had a dance band of my own, a jazz band of my own, a group which was a disaster of my own. And then I used to play with Jimmy Raw, which is sort of a rock and roll band. Then I just did sessions till I joined the Strawbs.
The Strawbs has now reached what it should have reached years ago, but never actually got round to. And this now is the Strawbs as it is, and there will never be another Strawbs, because the Strawbs will fold as long as, you know, I think rather than have any changes within the Strawbs, it'll just fold and drop.
I think we get on so well as well.
Yeah.
It's really like a family, you see. We all love one another dearly.
Sorry, the regular group press up every week. It's good, isn't it? There will never be another Strawbs, I don't think, after this one.
Listen to that piece. There'll never be another Strawbs again. Well, what's interesting, because the Strawbs are still recording now, 2021. There's still got stuff coming out, and there's loads of live stuff as well. So they're still going on. So if Rick Wakeman left the Strawbs and there's never been another Strawbs again, what happened there then?
Rick left to join Yes. That's the bottom line of it. But before that, they did bring out another album, which was highly acclaimed, From the Witchwood. The next time the Strawbs appeared in Nottingham was at Trent Polytechnic. It was called a Polytechnic in those days. And they had a new organist with them called Blue Weaver. Now, Blue Weaver had an interesting background because he was from our main corner. A band that, to be honest, I underrated. I feel quite humble when I look back at it, but I underrated them, so I just looked on them as a pop musician. But obviously, I went along to Trent Polytechnic to see this new organist, and it was his debut with the band. So Rick was out, Blue was in. So I asked, first of all, Dave Cousins, as far as Rick was concerned, what on earth went wrong?
Nothing's gone wrong at all. We've been expecting Rick, in fact, to leave, or now he's gone, we expected him to leave after Christmas. But, you know, we had a meeting to decide, in fact, that he should go rather more than, in fact, that he was going to leave, because things weren't working out between us, because more he was interested in sessions rather more than playing with the group. And in fact, he's sort of now said that when he realises that you can't do sessions all the time, and so he's realised that he's got to give them up. Now he's playing with another group, you know, because they think people just can't accept that sort of situation. And so we expected Rick to go, and now he's gone. Things, in fact, are working out much better with Blue, because it's a much more integrated band than it has been for a long time. The new songs which are coming up are much better worked out, much better together, much more together. They're better played, they sound better, in my opinion. And everything, you know, is, once again, if you want to say rosy, you know.
Blue, perhaps I can turn to yourself. You're moving from a teeny bopper band, you're now moving to a completely different world of popular music. What do you feel on joining the Strawbs? Can I just ask you that?
Yeah, well, I'm very happy that now I've got the scope, you know, to do the sort of things I've always wanted to do. Whereas with Fairweather before, I was very limited. You can much as say I was held back in a way, you know, because Andy was writing all the numbers.
What sort of frustrations do occur because you're working for an audience which really is there for adulation rather than listen to the music?
Well, it wasn't so much with Fairweather, you know, because Fairweather did change drastically from Amen Corner, you know. But that's basically why we broke up Amen Corner in the first place, is because we were getting a bit fed up with people just coming there to see us, you know, and not bothering to listen to what we were trying to get over to them, you know. Perhaps, you know, musically it wasn't perfect, you know, but at least we were trying hard, you know, to achieve something musically, even with Amen Corner.
Well, tonight is Blue's first night in front of a public, and obviously we wish him well, and I'm sure he will be well.
That's quite insightful, isn't it? That interview, the first part of it, where it's it was amicable, but then there's a few appears to be barbed comments in there as well, doesn't there?
That's the world of rock.
Yeah. So
the concert went down very well, by the way. It went down a storm. Blue Weaver really did fit into with the band, and it was a great success, even though I missed the mate Rick, if you like.
But didn't Blue leave as well then? So
he left in 1973 to become a session musician, a highly successful session musician. In fact, I suppose his greatest time was with the Bee Gees, and he worked on Saturday Night Fever. So Blue Weaver was about to plough quite an interesting career, and he's still around, I think.
When did you next catch up with Rick after on the context of these interviews?
A little bit later on, in 1974. Now, what had happened was Rick had recorded Topographic Oceans with Yes, been on tour with Yes. He'd also brought out this album, which was highly successful, The Six Wives of Henry VIII. There he is, he signed it. And I love that album. And now he had a huge project recorded at the Royal Festival Hall with the London Symphony Orchestra and with David Hemmings, who was a big star at the time, narrating. There was Rick in his cloak, big orchestra, Journey to the Centre of the Earth, it was called. He wanted to talk about that.
Of course, the main thing we must talk about is Journey to the Centre of the Earth, which has just been released. Yeah. It's recorded in January. You've had plenty of time to think about it now, to reflect. Yeah. Are you satisfied with the result?
Yes, I am. We had an awful lot of problems when we mixed it. We spent an awful long time mixing it, because it's not really like a studio recording. If something goes wrong, you can just do it again. I didn't want to do any overdubs. In fact, the only overdubs we had to do was on a couple of places on the vocals where somebody had kicked the lead out and we lost all the vocals on the tape. And I was really pleased with the end result. I really was. I mean, if I wasn't, it wouldn't have come out. I would never have released it. And I'm sure A&M would have felt the same. And what I would have done then is perhaps take it into a studio and just re-record the whole thing again.
So I was almost going to ask you that question. If you had the time again, would you have done it in a studio and perhaps made a few changes?
No. I wanted it to be a live thing because as it was a story and there were so many sort of parts involved with the choir, with the orchestra, with the group, the narration and the keyboards. It had to be something that could guarantee to flow, and the only way I think I could prove to myself that it flowed was to do it as a whole, to do it as a complete work. And the only way you can do that is to do it live.
What exactly guided your choice of musicians for the concert?
The choice of musicians was guided, funnily enough, by the Tommy concert, because I felt that the Tommy concert suffered badly because there were so many well-known people involved that I thought it detracted from the music. The people were more interested in the next face that came on to sing, or and I thought that the orchestrations were incredibly good. That was Will Malone and Danny Beckerman again. So I thought, right, well I use them because they're really good, and you can't really beat the LSO, and people like David Measham can get heavily involved. So I chose them. And then for the other musicians that I used, there are lots of very fine musicians about that can play really, really well, but the people haven't heard of because they haven't had any exposure or haven't had a chance to get through, or perhaps sometimes aren't interested in sort of wanting to become sort of a big star or something. They're just good players and want to play. So I picked on people who are musicians for musicians' sake, sort of thing.
But then he does this on the back of Tommy. Now, the interesting thing about Tommy is that there's a guy on that, he mentions him, called Will Malone. Will Malone, I first came across in Rob Storm and the Whispers and Orange Bicycle, who my wife he was a big fan of. They used to play down the dungeon, Rob Storm and the Whispers. So there's Will Malone producing this Tommy album. He then goes on and produces this Journey to the Centre of the Earth. Will Malone is still in the business, doing great music, and amazing, really.
It would be interesting to know from people out there, of course, if they're aware that did this launch the kind of careers of people on the
yes.
on it. It's been just nice to know, because it may be that it's just you said these became very good session musicians, but it may of course have launched the career of someone that we're unaware of.
Vocals Gary Pickford Hopkins and Ashley Holt, guitar Mike Egan, bass Roger Newell, drums Barney James, and that's it, I think. Yeah.
You will find out, of course, that they are that they form.
Did you know?
Did you know? But great. Put in the comments that this is what this is all about. It's charting music history.
Yes, that's right. It is.
Yeah.
It's lovely looking at this album.